The verse was great, and I understand what he
as
was
a
trying to
fan,
do.
I would enjoy a Drake and Kendrick kind of sparring session.
Well, I'm sure you would.
Yeah, I would. I'm sorry. What do you want me to do? You want me to lie to you about this?
No, that's good. That's good. I understand it. I understand it. I never thought Kendrick, but there's a couple other people I thought would have called my name by now that I never did. But
oh, is that what you're waiting for, the name call?
I'm waiting for it. I'm ready for it. Not waiting for it, but I'm ready for it.
Following everything that has transpired with SSS for you, we have now obtained sales predictions for Drake that show how this item is performing. Based on what we've seen so far, Drake is expected to have one of the worst weeks of his career. This makes it abundantly evident that Drake has lost his position as a leading artist and celebrity. These days, a lot of other rappers are surpassing him in addition to Kendrick Lamar. Furthermore, Drake is outright lying about the allegation that the entire industry and his company are sabotaging him, which generally makes everything that Drake has ever done appear worse. Now please remember to subscribe and leave a like before we continue. The Drake supporters are still upset with me for speaking the truth, as I have stated in my previous videos, and their ire is just growing. Regarding Drake and these figures, we have at last obtained the first week forecast for the 21-song Abomination that he released with PartyNextDoor. It is anticipated that this album would sell 250,000 copies in its first week, with 28,000 of those being pure copies. Remember that GNX recently completed 247,000 months since its release this week, before we delve any deeper. If we compare these opening figures to Drake's Honestly Nevermind album, they may not seem like the worst for other artists, but when you really understand how streaming models operate and how quickly these statistics can become incredibly deceiving, they are actually better. As artists like as Drake attempt to play this game in order to give themselves the finest numbers possible, it is evident that these numbers remain true. They are the worst Drake has ever had, and they are awful. Overall, they are making it abundantly evident that Drake has suffered more losses as a result of this feud than we could have ever anticipated. Despite his history of successful streaming beginnings with less than stellar albums such as For All the Dogs and CLB, he was unable to replicate that success here. Now, I won't even try to explain how horrible things have gone for Drake. Big A himself gave us a good idea of how disastrous this whole affair is. He launched into a lengthy tirade as he tried to deal with the reality that Drake has lost despite releasing a whole new album, since his situation is continuously getting worse. He tried to deal with these numbers in some of the most absurd ways possible, such as claiming that the performance of collaborative albums always falls in the middle of the respective artist's popularity. This act of explaining numbers and actually attempting to justify them is something he has never done before, and it is what embarrassed everyone. All things considered, the assertion he is making is a complete fabrication. Drake himself did not follow this criteria when he collaborated with artists like Future and 21 Savage, as evidenced by the success of those albums. What's different in this case then? Apart from the fact that Drake simply failed to provide the public with a musical experience that was valuable, of course. With this absurd rule that A is attempting to impose, his admission that he was concealing the release of the initial estimates prior to this, which were approximately 175,000, and numerous other pitiful and desperate posts. I mean, when you see the absurd things that A has attempted to do to explain how this is somehow a victory for Drake, neither winners nor those who are not attempting to alter the reality that we are all witnessing need to explain themselves this much. This is far worse than we could have imagined, especially considering that these same individuals were using their own reasoning to call Kendrick Lamar's 319,000 first week a failure. Now, what makes this so awful and really not comparable to what Kendrick Lamar did at all is that, first of all, Drake's first week numbers are something that no other artist has done, and it truly speaks to the caliber of that project. This is in addition to the fact that GNX only achieved 247,000 the week before this album was released, which simply illustrates the longevity that record is having. Of course, the Super Bowl also helped with this. Furthermore, given that GNX is a 12-track album, it received fewer streams overall than albums that are significantly longer. Of course, in this era of streaming, rappers and artists like Drake purposefully lengthen their albums in order to increase these numbers as much as possible. GNX and Kendrick are in a class by themselves because Kendrick didn't follow this and solely focused on creating a record full of amazing songs, never considering the numbers and still seeing the success he achieved. No other artist in this hip-hop era has been able to match the numbers he achieved with such a small track list. And in fact, most artists would never even consider doing it because they don't believe in their own craft enough to achieve this kind of success without breaking the law. To put things in perspective, GNX received over 360 million streams with just 12 songs, whereas Drake's album is expected to receive about 150 million with 21 songs. This obviously adds 9 more streams to each listen through, which naturally gives these platforms more music to post everywhere. Just to put things in perspective, if Kendrick's album had this many songs, well, there's no exact way to figure it out. But if you figure out how many people had to listen to GNX with almost twice as many tracks, it could have achieved a record-breaking 600 million streams. And that is the true distinction between the current status of these two artists. Given that Drake is now achieving honestly nevermind numbers with an album as long as For All the Dogs, the first week numbers indicate a nearly 50% drop in Drake listeners. There are no justifications for this, as the album was promoted by the industry despite Drake's claims, as we have all seen it on the front of platforms. However, it did not receive the same level of attention as Drake's previous records, as evidenced by the fact that GNX is already outstreaming it every day and the record was released. Drake's overall numbers are declining more quickly than we have ever seen, which is very similar to what happened with Lil Baby's album earlier this year. Although Lil Baby's record brought in lower numbers than his previous albums, his team was still able to support it and do the necessary work to ensure that it debuted at #1 and that its numbers appeared strong when it was released. The music is simply not as excellent, and as we have seen in the weeks that have followed, and once more in this industry, it is difficult to fabricate numbers for this long. As a result, it has fallen down far more quickly than his other albums have overall. I am confident that this is exactly what we will see when people listen to and tap into Drake and PartyNextDoor's album, because in every way imaginable, Drake is demonstrating that, following this feud, he is currently only worth roughly 50% of his former value, as evidenced by streams and the total number of albums he has moved. Drake is still the guy who believes he is bigger than the industry and wants a deal that even Taylor Swift does not have, which is why he has gotten so deep into the issues he is currently in with his label. However, if Drake was still doing these numbers and was content with where he is, there would be nothing more to say about this. Going forward, it will be evident that these kinds of numbers just do not let you walk about as though you are superior to the rest of the business, because so many rappers, including Travis Scott, Eminem, Tyler, and Kendrick, are easily outperforming Drake in terms of numbers. And he will just keep falling further down this list if this is the new benchmark he is establishing. Overall, the lesson Drake will need to take away from this is that he must accept that he is no longer among the top artists in terms of who is driving things forward if he hopes to ever achieve any kind of respectable success again. Even though Drake may not want to acknowledge this, the numbers and the support this record receives show that he has failed and is not being blocked or suppressed by the industry. His entire situation with his label and his attempts to prove himself there never seem worse because Drake's numbers haven't dropped to the point where it appears that the industry is involved. Rather, it just looks like this record just failed in comparison to the standards he held himself to, because things have changed and people aren't interested in his music anymore. All things considered, following this feud, Kendrick Lamar has demonstrated that he is capable of producing an album that is significantly more efficient in terms of the length of its track list and surpasses Drake's record, which is nearly twice as large. The more tracks you have, the more clearances you need to generate music in this industry. So naturally, Drake is putting a lot more into his releases, which means more resources are required overall. There is no need for what a guy like Drake is doing, because it is ineffective and is returning the entire industry to a point where hip-hop is stagnant and only getting worse. Kendrick Lamar is demonstrating why he is the best person to lead hip-hop forward, both artistically and in terms of how it will advance in the industry. He has the support of his fans and is able to produce music that yields much larger returns while using a lot less overall. Drake and those close to him will attempt to come up with every possible explanation for why they have witnessed such a significant decline in sales across all of their major albums, even if those figures turn out to be somewhat lower when they are officially released. Don't let this detract from the fact that, despite Drake's deliberate efforts to give the record the greatest possible streaming push, which of course were done to make it much longer than it needed to be, he still lost to Kendrick Lamar and numerous other MCs and artists. This is evident from the number of awful and uninteresting songs on the album. Everything is going to get much worse now that Drake is so far down the industry ladder in terms of what artists are most valuable. And even though the numbers are no longer in his favor, his ego is still unabated and he still thinks he is the best in this thing. All of this will make the catastrophe that is this album and this phase of his career have more negative effects than we could have ever imagined. After all of this, tell me what you think of Drake's predictions, how he lost to Kendrick, and what you anticipate happening now that his 20-plus song projects are only performing half as well as they once did. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, and if you've seen the entire video, please remember to like and subscribe because, like I mentioned before, it's more crucial than ever. Watch the suggested video to discover how Drake is attempting to place the blame for what would turn out to be his worst career disaster on everyone but himself at this precise moment.